Welcome to historic Kenmore, built in the 1770s by Colonel Fielding Lewis. This majestic example of Georgian architecture stands today as one of America's most elegant colonial mansions. Yet it also serves as a stark reminder of the myriad sacrifices made for independence from Great Britain. Kenmore's significance in American history lies not only in its extraordinary craft and architecture, but also as the home of George Washington's only sister, Betty. Her husband, Fielding Lewis, born in 1725 in Gloucester, Virginia, was a successful merchant, justice of the peace for Spotsylvania County, Virginia, and an elected official in the Virginia House of Burgesses. Fielding would play a crucial yet largely unknown role in the American Revolution, helping found, operate, and finance the Fredericksburg gun manufactory in open defiance of British parliamentary law. The gunnery produces and supplies muskets, bayonets, flintlocks, and ramrods to the Continental Army, commanded by his brother-in-law, General George Washington. Eventually, Fielding Lewis would sacrifice his entire fortune and even his health to the cause of American freedom. Betty Washington, the only surviving daughter of Augustine and Mary Ball Washington, is born at the family estate on Pope's Creek in Westmoreland County, Virginia, in 1735. In 1738, the Washingtons moved to a property on the Upper Potomac, known at the time as Little Hunting Creek. Eventually, it's renamed Mount Vernon. From there, 5-year-old Betty and 6-year-old George move again with their family to a property on the Rappahannock River near Fredericksburg, Virginia, now known as Ferry Farm. In 1743, Augustine passes away, leaving their young children to be raised by their mother, Mary. In 1750, at the age of 17, Betty marries Fielding Lewis, who is 8 years her senior. She also becomes stepmother to his 3 children from his first marriage. In 1752, Fielding purchases 861 acres of land overlooking Fredericksburg, Virginia, and the majestic Rappahannock River. He then prevails upon his brother-in-law, surveyor George Washington, to survey the large parcel for a plantation. In the early 1770s, Fielding and Betty, with a growing family, would begin work on what would become an exceptional residence.
At that time, a house of this size and this quality maybe represented 1% of the type of houses that were being built in the colonial period.
During its construction, Lewis used his own enslaved people, as well as indentured servants. He also employed skilled tradesmen and a very talented stucco man, whose name remains unknown to this very day.
It makes one wonder what was going on at the time to have in this house the finest plasterwork ever installed in a colonial house in this country. Even Mount Vernon's ceiling is nowhere on this caliber here. This house, I think, is an important patriotic symbol as well as an architectural symbol.
The young Lewis family moves into their new home in the late fall of 1775, on the eve of the American Revolution. Although the house was never used for elaborate dinners and balls for which it was intended, the Lewis family remained in the house for more than 20 years, witnessing the end of the war, suffering through Fielding's death just after the beginning of the new nation, and severe financial ruin. Following the Lewis family's time at Kenmore, the house had a long succession of owners, including the Gordon family in the 19th century, who were responsible for actually naming the house Kenmore. Miraculously, Kenmore survived the devastation of the Civil War. The mansion's position on a summit resulted in damage from both Confederate and Union cannon fire during the Battle of Fredericksburg.
May of 1863, there is again fighting here with heavy artillery around Mother Washington's monument, just down a block and a half. Later in 1864, this place becomes a field hospital, and it's well known that the floorboards were so stained with the remnants of surgery and all that accompanies those gruesome tasks. Many of the original floorboards were in fact removed. Some are still here.
By the early 20th century, Kenmore is in a state of major disrepair. It's in danger of either being converted into apartments or torn down completely. Local historian and preservationist Emily White Fleming rallies the Daughters of the American Revolution and other civic groups to purchase Kenmore and its surrounding grounds. The original asking price from owner Mr. Peck Heflin is $30,000. Vice President Calvin Coolidge even comes to Fredericksburg to launch this very special campaign.
Kenmore ought to be preserved for its own sake. It must be preserved for patriotic America.
The newly formed Kenmore Association sets out to raise the funds to purchase Kenmore. Their efforts are not in vain.
Mr. Heflin was kind enough to give those ladies 4 months to secure the first $10,000, which they did, and they finish it and pay off the note in 1932. Mr. Heflin gave them the time to do that. He also was one of the first major donors of $1,000 to the effort, thanks to these earliest leaders who said this must be a national effort. It is for the nation to restore and save places like this, and what better place than Kenmore, which is connected so closely to one of the founding families of our country.
By the early 2000s, the Kenmore Association has evolved into the George Washington Foundation, with the acquisition of the Ferry Farm property. They undertake a landmark restoration project of both the interior and exterior of the house, with the end goal of returning the Kenmore Mansion to the home that Betty Lewis and Fielding Lewis envisioned, designed, and last saw.
We are tied in directly to a founding family, and you want that story and that interpretation to be as accurate as the restoration you're undertaking. And when you think about the monumental task that was before the institution and all of the advances technologically that had happened since the last restoration over 40 years ago, you're really thinking about not only the forensic analysis of the paints down to the pigment, but you're also working through layers of paint and plaster to get down to the original building fabric itself.
There were all sorts of sciences that were brought to bear on the house in a really new way of being used in historic preservation. We used dendrochronology to date the wood timbers of the house. We used archaeology to uncover all of the artifacts on the site that revealed the pottery and ceramics and glassware that were used on the table here in Kenmore's dining room. We used microscopic analysis of all the painted surfaces and wallpapered surfaces in the house to tell us what the original color scheme, the original paint colors were. Following the restoration of Kenmore in the early 2000s, we embarked upon the next phase of reinterpreting Kenmore's history, and that was the refurnishing project. When the Lewises moved into Kenmore, they came with 5 of their children. They had 11 in total, only 6 of which reached adulthood. So this house was actually filled with small kids from a very early time. That's sometimes hard to express in a house that's a museum, that it was very loud and boisterous with animals and children running all over the place. But that's what Kenmore was. It was a very young family household.
When you look at the ceramics and glass that are in the houses, a lot of what you're seeing has been informed by the archaeology that happens right here in the lab. This was a medallion, and this depicts the letters GR, and that stands for George Rex. Rex is Latin for king. So this was a jug that would celebrate King George, the monarch that the Lewis family was actively fighting against. Yet they still brought it into their household. So archaeology sort of unveils the complicated nature of this transitional period from the Lewis family being English citizens to becoming Americans.
The goals of the refurnishing effort were to essentially retell the story of Betty and Fielding Lewis, their family, and the enslaved community that lived here on the property. It's very important for us at Kenmore to tell a fuller story about not just the lives of the Lewis family, but the many other people who lived here on the property during the 18th century and on the eve of the American Revolution.
The Enslaved Communities Research Project began in 2018, ultimately revealing the names of 132 enslaved Americans on this site and at Fielding's other plantation in Frederick County, Virginia. The project revealed how the lives of the enslaved can more fit into the larger story of American slavery.
In Virginia, about 1770, I would say about 40% of the population of Virginia would be enslaved. You had three types of slavery: enslaved people in the cities, we call them city slaves. Then you had plantation slaves, and then you had slaves upon the high seas. Life on plantations, on farms, mainly routine. You have slave cabins, or will have a garden of their own that will be allowed. Normally in any household, say for the city, the highest one in that structure would be the right-hand man of the gentleman of that particular household. The next person that would be second highest as far as the enslaved in that household would be the cook. You have your laundress, might be third in line. Then you have lady's maid.
According to Fielding Lewis's probate inventory, at the time of his death in 1781, there were about 80 people here on site.
The American Revolution would have a profound impact on African Americans throughout the 13 states of the new nation. The ideals of the Revolution made many decide that slavery was simply wrong. The institution of slavery remained important in the South. However, manumission was increasingly being discussed in the American colonies. In 1776, English-born Thomas Paine pens the now celebrated 47-page pamphlet, Common Sense. It's widely credited as playing a pivotal and motivating role in convincing colonists to take up arms against England.
In colonies where you have your workforce, which are mainly the enslaved people, and someone planting ideas of liberty, freedom, equality, and justice, that is not something many of the slave owners wanted to happen.
Archaeology at historic Kenmore begins in the 1990s with a survey of the property, attempting to identify outbuildings.
One of the interesting aspects about archaeology here at Kenmore is that the house was not the first thing that happened here. There's actually agricultural fields here. We did phytolith analysis early on and discovered that this was actually a cornfield.
Archaeological digs continued to reveal important artifacts and clues about life at Kenmore. Some areas, however, still remain a mystery.
The gun manufactory is actually still missing. There's people that know and suspect where they think it is, and they've conducted digs, and those digs have been terrible failures. And so one of the things that we still want to do is try and find the gun manufactory sometime in the near future.
Palladio stated, "They must be arranged in every part so that those who enter them will be astonished and stand there with their spirits raised when contemplating their grace and beauty." And I think that applies perfectly to Kenmore.
For more information about the George Washington Foundation, please visit kenmore.org.